Okay, welcome back. This is week 3, lesson 2, and we're going to talk about emotions, inflammation, and inner awareness. So here's a little overview. So many of us were never taught how to recognize or safely express emotions. But for women with autoimmune conditions, emotional suppression can quietly fuel the inflammation that drives symptoms. So, learning to notice, name, and safely feel your emotions is a really powerful tool for calming the immune system and reclaiming your health from the inside out. When we push emotions down, especially really uncomfortable ones like grief or anger or fear, they don't just go away. They get stored in the nervous system and the body. And studies show that emotional suppression leads to higher cortisol levels, increased inflammation, and more pain and fatigue. So, unexpressed emotion becomes internal stress, and expression of our emotions is what helps to bring relief and regulation. Alexithymia is a term for having difficulty identifying or describing your emotions. It is very common in trauma survivors and in people with chronic illness. So you may feel body symptoms like tightness in your chest or tension in your shoulders, pressure in your stomach, fatigue, right? But you don't really know what emotion is behind those body sensations. And this disconnect makes it much harder to regulate because you don't really understand what's happening, right? So rebuilding emotional awareness is how we begin to shift this. So the vagus nerve we've talked about before, it is the main communication pathway between your brain and body. And like we've talked about, it plays a key role in your digestion and immune regulation and emotional expression. So when we express emotions through our breath, through tears, through our voice or movement, we are stimulating the vagus nerve and helping the body shift out of that fight, flight, freeze, or fawn state into a state of healing. So this is not just emotional, it's biological, right? Our emotions do affect what's happening in our body biologically. So think of unprocessed emotion as an emotional load, right? It's kind of like a backpack you're carrying, and um, it's full of hidden weights that the body carries. So if we never slow down to feel or reflect or release, that load continues to build, right? So you might have heard the example too of if somebody asks you to hold out a bottle of water, right? In that moment, it's pretty easy to do. You could probably do it for maybe a couple of minutes, right? But if you hold it there for 10 minutes or 20 minutes, right, even something as light as a little bottle of water starts to get really heavy. And the same can be true with our emotions, right? Maybe even in that moment when you suppressed it, pushed it down, it wasn't that big of a deal, but then you're stuffing it in your backpack, right? And you're carrying it around for 10, 20, 30 years, right? And other things are getting stuffed in there. It becomes a really heavy load. So research has shown that emotional overload hugely contributes to autoimmune flares and brain fog and just chronic fatigue. So lightening that load is super important, and it starts by just being able to notice it and choosing compassion over self-judgment. So how do we do that? How do we lighten this load, right? Well, body mapping is a very simple but powerful technique that helps us notice where emotions are living in the body. It's common to feel like a tight chest if you're feeling anxious, or maybe a nervousness in your stomach, if you're dealing with a lot of grief or sadness. But many of us were never taught to connect these sensations in our body with emotional experiences. So body mapping really helps to bridge that gap. So just to kind of do this together really quick. Think about your body, right? Like literally what that looks like. And then without judgment, just ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? And where do I notice that in my body? So you might feel heat somewhere. You might feel a coldness or a numbness or tingling or pressure, right? No wrong answers. It's just observing whatever is present in your body. So as you're doing this, right, just remember that this is not about being perfect or diagnosing yourself. It's just about compassionate noticing and connecting with your body. So for those of us with trauma histories, going slowly and staying curious is really key. We are not forcing feelings to emerge. We are just creating a safe space for that awareness to continue to grow. So the more that we're able to do this and kind of track our physical sensations, the more we are building a relationship with our body that is deeply rooted in safety and understanding, not fear and frustration, right? And that might be a really big change for a lot of us. So over time, this practice can reduce emotional overwhelm, calm inflammation, and really deepen the connection with yourself and that connection with your brain and your emotions and your body. So this is the emotion wheel. I use this a lot in clinic, and I really encourage you. There is a copy of this in our module for this lesson. So print this out if you can, or take a screenshot on your phone. This is a really helpful tool in that it really helps you put a name with what you're feeling that goes beyond just fine or okay, right? I hear that a lot in clinic of how are you doing? And people say, I'm fine. Well, what does that mean to you? What does fine look like? What does that feel like? So you can use this, the emotion wheel, to identify both core and nuanced feelings like disappointed or lonely. And it's just a really helpful tool to help you put a name to what you were actually experiencing. And when you name a feeling, especially when you can be really specific, your brain actually calms, right? It feels like it's understanding what's happening, and that can be very reassuring. So try pausing at least once a day to just find your word and write it down, right? Or at least make a mental note. What's your word of the day? What are you feeling in that moment? And, again, like I said, there is a copy of this in our curriculum. So make sure that you, have it on your phone or print it out so that way you have it handy to kind of help you practice this. Okay, so each of these tools we've talked about today, body mapping, using the emotion wheel, and then of course journaling, which is something we've covered in past past lessons. They all serve a different but very connected purpose. So when used together, they create a full picture of what you're feeling emotionally and physically. And this multi-dimensional tracking supports nervous system regulation, or what we call neuroimmune coherence. And that's basically just where your mind and your body begin to speak the same language again. And it's hugely important to your healing process. So to make this sustainable, keep it practical, right? Set aside small, consistent moments. Maybe it's 5 minutes in the morning when you first wake up, or 5 minutes before you go to bed as part of your nighttime routine that you're kind of practicing some of these tools. And don't worry about doing all of them, right? We're covering a lot of different tools because I want you to have them all in your psychological toolkit. And then you get to be curious, right, of what works best for you. And maybe some of those tools work better on certain days, depending on what you're feeling emotionally and even in your body. So, don't worry about doing them all every day. Just do what feels right for you. You might use the emotion wheel one day and then journal the next. You might practice some breathing exercises and then do some body mapping later on. So let it be flexible and fluid. It's not rigid. There's no wrong way to do it. The goal is consistency without pressure, right? So most importantly, while you're practicing this stuff, just honor your capacity. If something feels overwhelming, pause, take a break. If it's feeling like it's too much, then gently shift your focus to maybe some grounding or breathing exercises. So this work, it should feel safe and not forced. So go at your own pace. The process of building awareness is healing itself, just noticing what's happening in your body. And that is really effective when it's guided by compassion and not criticism. Okay, so one more thing just to kind of tie all this together. We talked about checking in daily, maybe figuring out what your emotion is for the day and jotting that down. So um, if you want to take it a step further, when you notice what you're feeling emotionally, also jot it down or make a mental note. What sensations are happening in your body? Like, where do you feel good or where does it feel not so good? And then also make a note of one act of support that you can give yourself in that moment, right? And that can be as big or small as you want it to be. You know, if you have the whole day that you can go and have a massage or read a book, right? Like that's great, but maybe you only have 2 or 3 minutes, so you just can kind of sit quietly and practice some breathing skills. Or maybe you just, make sure your body gets enough water that day. Like those are all acts of compassion and kindness towards yourself. So they all count. But just, be mindful that all of these practices are working to rewire your brain and your awareness, and that awareness builds emotional fluency over time. So that's why that consistency is super important. This work, emotional awareness, right, it is not soft work. It is really brave work, and it is essential for helping to heal your autoimmune illness. So when you begin honoring how you feel, you reduce the internal pressure and you calm inflammation and you build a more honest relationship with your body. And that's the goal here, right? So keep using these tools over the next couple of weeks and just keep watching that connection to yourself continue to deepen. So I hope you've enjoyed this lesson. I think there's some really good tools in here. I really enjoy the body mapping and the emotion wheel. Those are things I use a lot just for myself. So make sure you check out the worksheet and the other companion resources in our curriculum. And then I will look forward to seeing you next time in our last lesson for this week, which will be lesson 3. See you then.